Okay, so let's just get past the point that the almost shockingly high DxO Mark score has no real life meaning at all, because otherwise it would mean that it can compete with the very best ones from Samsung, Sony and Huawei, which it just can't. But it is a very good camera, it is a big improvement over the Mi Mix 2, and it is way better than most people would actually need. But this phone also doesn't cost nearly as much as the ones that I previously mentioned, and that is totally fine, because besides the fact that this is not the best camera phone on the market, it is a fantastic phone, and I want to let you know why that is, especially already starting with the design, which has nothing to do with the case, but I just want to show that real quick. It doesn't really add any grip to me, but it feels good and it will give it at least some protection, even though it won't really protect the front. But here's my highlight when it comes to the design. 6 inches versus 6 inches with 2x1. And now let's just check how much shorter the Mi Mix 2S is. And even narrow. Okay, therefore it's a little bit thicker. And if you compare that with the Huawei P20 Pro, you will see that it's also still noticeably shorter, but in that case you will see of how much actually narrower, which is noticeable, the P20 Pro is, and also thinner, even though it has the bigger battery. But nothing changes the fact that I think that this is the best execution of a near bezel-less design, because put everything to the bottom, make a chin, because this will actually help you with accessing the buttons. It will help with the weight distribution, because it won't feel like the phone would flip over all the time, and it just doesn't look as elongated as many other 2x1s phone do. So I am happy with that. And compared to the Mi Mix 2, they actually did a few little bit of some improvement to the design when it comes to that in terms of size, because it's now a millimeter narrower. It's therefore though a millimeter taller and like a half a millimeter thicker. But in overall, I have to say it's not a significant change, but it is a noticeable change, at least for me, in terms of feel, because it feels a little bit more compact, it feels a little bit nicer in the hand. And when I'm talking about nice, this has a lot to do with the incredible execution of this device. And it's not just the build quality, but it's the overall design and everything else, because the buttons, just take a here. Super subtle, but nice click and great tactile feedback. They are placed pretty much perfect. Yes, the back will attract a lot of fingerprints, but therefore, at least for me, it gives me a lot of grip in most situations, which unfortunately the frame does not. Because that was already a complaint from me on the Mi Mix 2, that it is a weird coating, kind of like powder coated, and therefore just has no texture, and even glossy would be better, because the overall frame is quite slippery. The phone can still be held very easily, and one hand use is actually quite good. Like I said, you can easily reach those buttons, and you can actually manage, because of the great distribution, to get to the top without the phone flipping over. Other than that, we have the camera. Yes, it does protrude a little bit, but that is absolutely fine. But it will wobble on the floor. For me, it's not a big thing. We don't have an IR blaster anymore like on most Xiaomi phones, but the microphone, we don't have an SD card, which is normal on the Mix. We have a dual nano SIM, and then we have the speaker that works with the earpiece. We have USB Type-C, we have the microphone, and we have the fingerprint reader. And you have already seen of how many times I actually activated and unlocked this phone without even trying to, because I think this is pretty much a near perfect position, at least for my kind of short fingers, because so many times I unlocked this phone without realizing why, because the fingerprint reader is so conveniently placed, and it is also reacting super fast, and this is one of the best ones out there. Along with actually one more thing, as you can see here, it has face unlock, so I'm just gonna hold it up roughly to my face and it works really nice. What you don't notice though is that you see the lock screen for a split second, which makes it kind of seem like it's not a fast unlock, but it is, because now you can see it unlocks really fast. And this is just a little bit of a different interpretation of the unlock, because for example on Huawei P20 Pro, the screen unlock or turns on slower without the lock screen though, and therefore it seems faster, but it's about on par. On the front, as you can see, flat with a very nice transition and an amazing transition towards the back. And this phone generally has such great execution. Everything feels smooth, rounded off. You don't feel any gaps and you don't feel any imperfections. And this is pretty much the best built phone that I've seen so far. Luxurious as hell. Sounds a little bit hollow here, but general feels so amazing. Great weight, great premium fit. Absolutely top. Now the display. 580 lux, which is actually noticeably above average by now, because what I've noticed is with 2x1 phones, display quality actually did not improve anymore. We kinda are at a hold, and everyone was just changing their manufacturing to 2x1 instead of improving the technology. Because if you have a really good 2016 or 17 display, it won't be really less than this. But this is great. Now what I don't like is that automatic contrast gives us the options to change the color temperature, but increased does not. Because increased works better, because automatic contrast in bright situations just boost the contrast so heavily that completely the picture gets dull and doesn't look well. And standard for me just looks just too warm, which you don't really see that much on the video. But it doesn't change the fact that the viewing angles are mostly very stable on a good level. Of course, on the camera it always looks worse. I like the calibration as it is. Overall, the white point is good, and it is a fully pleasing display. The 5-star rating it will get just because we didn't really see anything much better anymore, because there are higher res displays but not really of that quality. So I would wish for some more improvement, but since nothing has happened over the last 1 or 2 years, this is still a top-notch display. Now what about the speaker? So yes, still a dual speaker system, and I would actually say it's pretty much the same as it was on the Mi Mix 2, because I don't really see an improvement. I actually think it almost sounds a little bit less loud and a little bit thinner, because the earpiece just doesn't really give you all that much sound. It is still a very good sound, so 4.5 stars just because of the fact that it is dual stereo and it has, or dual speaker system, and it has some kind of stereo effect. But in many situations, since there's just so much more sound coming from you should still try to reflect the sound. But it is loud enough in all situations and it sounds good. But for example, something like an S9 still sounds significantly, or let's say the least easily noticeable, better. Headphone jack though, which you have noticed, and I know it's a deal breaker for many, but I can tell you this much. This is one of the best dongles that I've had so far. And I didn't really try it side by side with the other ones that I had from Xiaomi in the past, but this is, I would say, the loudest, if not by much, loudest phone with a dongle. Something like the V30 still with the quad deck and such is better, but this is pretty much the best sound that I've heard from a dongle phone so far. Even though I have not tried all of them, obviously, sure. But really loud, clean quality. You have the options in the settings for equalizing, for presettings and all that. And actually very pleased. I would still just give it 4.5 stars because otherwise it would be already too close to something like a V30. But for most phones, this is as good as it can get. But obviously with the dongle. Now performance-wise, I can actually make this really quick. Snapdragon 845, and I'm just gonna tell you one thing. First of all, the launch times obviously are fast. Nothing to really be concerned about here, but I hear some people saying that the 845 is not a huge step over the 835. And maybe it's not a huge step, and maybe it's not a significant step, but it is a noticeable step, and that's what's important for me. I can feel the difference. Everything feels just more consistent. Everything feels just lighter. Everything just feels a little bit more responsive. And the only thing that makes actually these Xiaomi phones feel a little bit slower is the fact that they have this animation that you can see here. Because, for example, many Oreo phones by now just skip this animation and therefore it feels faster, but this phone is super fast. It's super reliable, multitasking is absolutely strong. Of course, not everyone maybe likes this kind of view, but even an app like G Plus that runs crappy on everything works out really great. Gaming is also great. It did get a little bit warmer though, even though I'm not quite sure if it's just because it's getting warmer outside now or if it's because of the little bit less efficiency. I don't think so, of the 845. But for example, the Sony Xperia XZ2 that I reviewed also didn't really get warm. It's not hot or anything like that, but in normal use, a little bit more heavier use, it gets a little bit warm, but not to a degree that I would be worried about. Now about the charge. I actually did not get to charge to measure that, but last year with the Mi Mix 2, since it's the same battery, it was already 1 hour 20, so I would expect something like that around. But 9% for an audio YouTube, that is noticeably above average, which is roughly like 12%, but the battery life, at least to some degree, is absolutely fantastic, with one little bit of a gripe that I personally have, but it could also have to do with some things of the China ROM. Now, here's the thing. If you are a heavy user, you can get 7.5 hours of mobile data on it. But if you are not a heavy user and you give this phone more standby time, where it just doesn't seem to kind of properly shut down, you maybe reach like still 6.5, maybe 6 hours for sure. But the less you actually use it, the worse your battery life gets or your screen on time. So if I had it mostly in my pocket during work and I didn't get the time to use it, I was closer to like 6 hours. over the course of a whole day, still 6.5. But on heavy use, 7.5, because while using it, it's super efficient. So standby drain is my little bit of an issue with Xiaomi phones. I've noticed that on my Mi 6, I've noticed that on my Mi Note 3. And that's the one thing where they are not quite on the same level as the most kind of like stock Android phones. So I think that has something to do with MIUI or whatever kind of background tasks are going on. Otherwise, though, really, really top. And talking about that optimization and that software, I still like the software, and pretty much my only gripe is by now you have to actually unlock to get to the global ROM, but I think most people will just buy it with that once it's available. It looks ugly out of the box, and that's why in my preview I had a theme running, because with a theme you can heavily improve the design, because I think this just doesn't look nice anymore with this. I don't like that, so we have a great theming option. Now, in terms of software, so you know what I am running, is this would be, where is that? It's Android 8.0, and it's, as you can see, a very new update, or security update for March, and the version number you can see 9.512, because this is the Chinese stable, even though I think I wanted to flash the developer, but it doesn't change the fact, because this has a few impacts on, for example, notifications I did not get from Gmail, even though it did sync and I got the mails, but it just didn't get me notifications. But that's usually a thing that happens on the China ROM, will not happen on the other ROM. But otherwise, we have, of course, customizable quick settings. We have a one screen mode that I just don't have activated. We can rearrange the buttons. You have, for example, also nice gestures with a double tap to turn on the light. We have some more things, like, for example, of course, full screen display options. On the notification bar, we have a lot. We can change, can show the speed. Tons and tons of options that I just don't want to go into. But one thing that I want to go into is the fact that many people actually don't give it enough credit what Xiaomi does in terms of updates, because they give updates for a very long time. You don't get the proper big Android version very quickly, but you get usually, like, if you have at least the developer ROMs running, you get like an update every week that fixes minor things, and you get that for a very long time. And I think that's something you have to appreciate, because I've heard people with 4-5-year-old Xiaomi phones that still have the newest MIUI ROM. Just the Android version takes a little bit longer, but that's okay. Like I said, this is the Chinese ROM, and I had no trouble with connection, because from what I heard is that every version has band 20, even though I have at first some people saying something different. But the fact is, from what Trading Shenzhen told me, which after all they gave me the device for a review, is that the bigger versions have more bands, like for example band 28 or something like that. But band 20 should be a thing. I had no reception issues, call quality was okay, everything on that part. Now, let's get into the camera. And yeah, the UI is still the same. I would wish for this to be just a toggle directly without having to go in and change things, but otherwise the design is nice. We have a slow motion mode, just in case a few people are asking, but it doesn't really say which one it is, and I didn't really check too much of what a frame rate it is, even though I think it should actually be shown. So it's 1080p at 240 frames and 720 at 240 frames, which is not that amazing. Many can do like over 900 by now. But the rest, though, pretty much typical options. I don't need to go into that, but what I definitely have to go into that is the quality. So let's just check that. And I've said already in the preview, I think the selfie cam is okay. It's not the highest res one, and it's not the crazy sharpest one, but the pictures are good. But pretty much every picture, and that is just a general thing, is overexposed. So if you, for example, use it for Instagram or everything else, and you just have filters and such, you can easily correct that with that. But if you want great selfies out of the box, just live with overexposure. As you can see here, this just looks way too flat and way too overexposed. Otherwise, the quality, colors and everything are fine. We have a bokeh mode that works, I would say, decent. There are better ones out there, as you can see. But with my little bit of hair, it always cuts off a little bit. But the quality is absolutely okay. Inside, quality degrades a little bit, as you can see. And what was that? Then, as you can see here, for example, pictures look nice. Absolutely. But not really great. Low light, of course, degrades, obviously. Now, outside with really good weather, almost too good weather, and I've noticed that some cams actually have trouble with too much light and hard shadows and such. But I'm just gonna say it, the DxOMark score is BS, because this is not on the level of a Samsung S9, XZ2 or Huawei P20 Pro. I mean, it's sharp, it looks nice, the autofocus works very reliable, and it has some good modes, but it's just not quite as natural in terms of color, for example, to the XZ2. It's just not quite as sharp, not quite as fast. HDR mode works fine in my opinion, and it is a very good camera and very, very close to like 5 stars of a rating, but just not quite there. And then we have, for example, AI features that I will show you in just a second that are pretty much a joke in my opinion. Not even a gimmick, it is a joke, at least for right now. And I know it's not final yet, and some things about AI should improve, but just look at this. This is the normal picture, which looks fine. And this is what AI does. And this is pretty much what AI does every time when it recognizes something. It just oversaturates colors. Once again here, this just doesn't look natural at all anymore. For maybe some people it's pleasing, and it's a nice option if you want to boost the picture. I'm totally okay with that, but don't expect the picture to be actually more accurate or better or anything like that. Then though, I have to say low light pics look actually quite good, because it's noticeably brighter now. There's not a lot of some stuff visible, so I can't really remember the name, but it looks good. It picks up quite enough light, so pictures are actually sometimes brighter than reality or what you see with your eyes, so totally happy with that. Now about video, let's talk about that. The reason why I'm just giving it 4.5 stars, even though autofocus is really good, and you will see this later on, and the picture quality with good lighting is good, is the fact that there is still a little bit too much artifacting going on, which you will see right now. This is just too much for a high-end cam on fast motion. Then there is no proper EIS, at least not yet, on the 4K cam, which in my opinion is fine, because I have quite steady hands when I do video, and that's why it's actually looking quite good. But for people who have shaky hands and so it's not the perfect solution, because 1080p makes a way better job here, because as you can see here right now, how well the autofocus works in just a second. So this is now on a Samsung level, because as you can see how quickly it jumps. It could be maybe a little bit more subtle, but that's what Samsung does as well, so that's okay. 1080p has stabilization, it works really nice as you can see here, but the picture quality definitely degrades a bit. Artifacting is also less of a thing, so in case you want just stabilized pictures that are videos that look good and have less artifacting, you should maybe even stick with 1080p. If you want better quality, obviously you have to go for 4K, but I think, as far as I've heard, the EIS should come soon. Outside, the front cam looks nice, but as you can see, it's not stabilized, and this is very shaky now. I think also the crop is a little bit too heavy. I've said it already in the past with the Mix 2. The camera position is a little bit weird. You have to get used to it, but I actually had a little bit of a less weird time this time with the cam, so just get used to that. You just have to grip it a little bit different, but otherwise it's fine. Quality is also good. What is not good at all though is the microphone quality, and I would really like to show you this, but for some reason if I grab the sound from the desktop, it sounds completely too low in terms of volume, but it's extremely thin. It actually distorts if you talk a little bit louder. It's not high quality. As you can see here in low light, it still degrades, but the mic quality is the biggest issue here of the video cam. But that's it. So rating and conclusion. Like I said, the camera is not the very best one. AI is really a gimmick and some other things, but overall, I think this is way more than good enough, because for what you actually use a camera, for Instagram, Snapchat, Twitter and all this social media, this is way more than good enough. And it's also way more than good enough for what people mostly use it for, unless they make huge printouts. I'm not worried, because the quality is what it is important, nice and sharp, it's consistent, you get great results pretty much every time. I had no pictures that turned out bad. And that's why I don't think that is an issue, because therefore you get a device that is noticeably cheaper, like roughly 500 at the moment. And it has everything, of course, global. You have to keep just importing and such in mind, even though many countries by now already offer that. But killer build quality, killer design in my opinion, with the best way to make 2x1 with bezel, a near bezel-less design. You get a top display, even though not the very best one. You get a really good speaker, even though not the best one. You get killer performance. There is just nothing better out there at the moment. Something like an XZ2, which is kind of still the pinnacle, is pretty much on par and just feels faster due to the lack of animations. Then we have a battery life that, if you use it heavily, will definitely hold you for long enough, but it's not really that much of a great 2-day phone just because of the standby drain. And then we have a software that you just have to get used to a while, because I've used it so often, I'm okay with it. Totally no issues at all. Some minor quirks are there, but those are minor quirks, and the camera fully delivers. And therefore, for not getting the best camera, I think saving 300 or 400 euros and therefore getting a lot of other qualities that you don't get on other phones. Because there are many phones, like for example the P20 Pro, that have... Yeah, don't want to talk about P20 Pro. But it is a very solid overall phone. There is not really a huge flaw anymore because the camera last year, I think it was, even though for most people, I think they put just too much weight on the camera. This for 500 is as good as a camera as you can pretty much get. With the package in mind though, it's a top device and I really liked it, and for me actually one of my favorite phones so far, just because I'm a big fan of the design and everything else, and the camera is easily good enough for me. And then the price and every other good category is top. So 20 minutes, wow, longer than I expected. So I hope I answered everything. If not, comments. And otherwise, wish you a nice day. Bye.